Everly and Kian crossed paths at university. Everly was immediately drawn to the introverted nature of Kian. It's a universally known fact that opposites attract, and Everly diligently scoured the campus for a boy who wouldn't fancy her. Kian happened to fit the bill. In their classes, Everly could be found engrossed in her drawings, paying little heed to the lecture, while Kian admired her from a distance. Her rosy-cheeked dimples and fiery red mane drove him wild, though he kept his emotions under wraps. It was Everly who took the plunge and made the first move, ultimately winning over Kian's heart forever. As their relationship blossomed over the course of a year, Kian sought to make Everly his partner for life, offering her his hand and heart. And by the time they reached the end of their university journey, they had embraced a shared surname and matching rings on their fourth digits. Classmates may have chuckled at their union, but the young lovebirds paid them no mind. Kian resided in a rented abode, while Everly eventually made it her home as well. Kian's parents dwelled in the neighboring village, his place of origin, and Everly solely had her hardworking mother to rely on for support as she single-handedly raised her 3 daughters. This absence of intrusive relatives allowed the couple to revel in their own happiness, unburdened by external disturbances. Their joy was short-lived. Following his studies, Kian was summoned to fulfill his military service. Everly was deeply saddened by this turn of events, but they had no alternative. Kian adamantly refused to chicken out, and before long, Everly came to terms with his decision. Kian's mother cautioned him against leaving his young wife alone for an entire year, recognizing it to be an unwise choice. However, Kian erupted in frustration, accusing her of lacking faith in his wife and his choices. It never crossed his mind that something could go amiss and Everly might not wait for him while he served in the army. He truly believed that their love could conquer any impediment and only grow stronger. The initial months without her husband slipped by in no time for Everly. She adjusted to living by herself, becoming acclimated to her new job, leaving her no room for boredom. At work, she enjoyed the company of a pleasant and youthful teen, making new friends with whom she often gathered at someone's home or ventured out together. Everly had never experienced such a wealth of social interaction before, and she excitedly recounted her activities to her husband during their phone conversations. Kian did not possess a trace of possessiveness. He was convinced she would not engage in any indiscretions. In fact, he took delight in knowing that she was relishing her time during his absence. Everly initially became aware of Ethan's interest in her during one of the gatherings at his residence. He dedicated more time to her than to the other guests, consistently checking if everything was all right. Initially, she interpreted it as ordinary hospitality and nothing more. However, her perspective shifted when another coworker approached her with a mischievous grin. "Do you fancy our Ethan? Look at how he flaunts himself in front of you," Bailey hinted, winking. "Actually, I'm married," Everly responded with a bewildered expression. "Well, where's your husband?" "Far away, while Ethan is right here," the woman retorted, smiling again. Of all her colleagues, Everly favored Ethan the most. He was erudite, possessed a brilliant sense of humor, and was older than the rest, remaining unattached. Prior to her conversation with Bailey, Everly had never contemplated other men. Kian was her sole focus. They planned their future family life, complete with children and their own apartment. Any other man simply did not fit into these meticulous plans. Yet for some inexplicable reason, Ethan lingered in Everly's thoughts. Evidently, he detected changes in her behavior, prompting his attentiveness to become increasingly obvious. Succumbing to her desires, the young woman and Ethan commenced a clandestine liaison. In her telephone exchanges with her husband, waves of guilt overwhelmed Everly, and she fought hard to swallow her tears, striving to conceal her inner turmoil. Once the call was disconnected, she wept quietly into her pillow. Deceiving the guileless Kian had never been her intention, but fate had other plans. Fear gripped her as time marched relentlessly on. The year would soon conclude and her husband would be back. What then? She found herself caught in an agonizing dilemma, torn between conflicting emotions. In the presence of her lover, Everly felt a profound love for him alone. Yet each time her husband reached out to her, the enduring affection she held for him became undeniable. Ethan sometimes, after intercourse and intimacy together, asked her about their future together. "What should we do, Everly? What is it?" he asked as they lay together. She was silent, not knowing the answer not only to this, but to any other question. "Let's get a divorce and we'll start over," Ethan insisted, inviting her to admit that their marriage was just a mistake of youth. Every time he insisted, she just wanted to disappear. Resentment towards Ethan was growing in her. Couldn't he see the extent of her suffering? Why should he express such thoughts out loud? Kian's term of service was drawing to a close, and he felt a rush of joy knowing that he would finally be reunited with his wife. For nearly a year, Everly had been nothing more than a distant figure in photographs and video chats, as Kian had served thousands of kilometers away from their hometown. The anticipation of seeing his beloved and embracing her ignited an intense longing within him. Just before Kian's homecoming, Everly made the decision that things couldn't go on like this any longer, and she and Ethan had to part ways. Her lover reacted to this revelation with a mix of confusion and resentment, unable to comprehend why the woman who had professed her love mere moments ago had suddenly resolved to return to her husband. Anger welled up inside him towards Everly. She had resolved to quit her job to ensure that she would never again run into Ethan under any circumstances. As for Everly herself, she had made up her mind to expunge the year they had spent together from her life, vowing to never recall it again. Unfortunately, destiny intervened, preventing her from meeting her husband as planned. Just a few days before his arrival, Everly found herself admitted to the hospital, writhing in excruciating pain. In the waiting room, concerned individuals queried, "How far along are you?" Frightened by the question, Everly shook her head and stammered, No, my husband is in the army," unable to form a coherent response. However, the nurse, observing her with a shocked expression, burst into laughter and mirthfully chimed in, "Surely there are other men in your life besides him, aren't there?" Everly's insides tightened with apprehension. When the ultrasound confirmed her pregnancy, she wept so vehemently that the doctor became genuinely concerned for her well-being. Several options were presented to her, allowing her to decide the course of action, but she lacked the courage to terminate the pregnancy. She knew that concealing this truth from her husband would be impossible, and it was probable that Kian would seek a divorce. Even prior to Everly's release from the hospital, he erupted in fury upon discovering his wife's betrayal. He felt as though he could explode if anyone approached him in that moment. Simultaneously, an abyss of pain was growing within him, dragging him further and further down. When Ethan became aware of Everly's predicament and arrived to collect her belongings from her apartment, a confrontation between him and Kian ensued. Fortunately for the lover, the husband's father appeared out of nowhere and intervened, preventing the situation from escalating. The wife's possessions were flung out of the window, and Ethan swiftly fled. Kian was not left in the dark about his ex-wife's subsequent life. He knew that she had escaped from her second husband's clutches after a few years of marriage. This revelation clenched his heart. He was astonished to discover that he still harbored concern for Everly, but he forced himself to resist offering any assistance. After all, she was the one who created this mess, and now she must clean it up on her own.